It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Today on CityCast Houston, after months of public discourse, are we about to see new fees in Mayor Whitmire's new budget? Plus, you won't believe the latest Mike Miles scandal. And a local TV figure is calling it a career. Pulitzer Prize finalist Evan Mintz joins me to recap the news from the week. It's Friday, May 17th. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Evan, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, Raheel. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Okay, I have to start with this one. It's not funny. It's kind of scary because it could have caused more damage. But this week's barge crash on Pelican Island's bridge, whoa, did you see that?
I saw that. That's crazy. I mean, we're lucky that there's not a lot of people on Pelican Island. You got some A&M students, and that's kind of it. But so weird. You know, I'm wondering, are there just barge crashes all the time that nobody paid attention to? And then you had a big one in Baltimore, and now we're looking at all of them?
It has to be, right? Because this one caught everyone's attention right away. And the thing that wasn't getting talked about enough, and they're still dealing with this right now, is that the capacity of the barge is about 30,000 gallons of vacuum gas oil, and that did leak. And officials don't know how much exactly went into the water. So they've closed a stretch of 6.5 miles around that crash site to make sure that everything is good. And that's such a fragile ecosystem. So that's a scary part as well. Like, what is in that water? And by the way, right around there, you've got beaches, right? So it's scary.
You want to make sure they contain that stuff. But what's really scary is thinking about what if we had that on a massive scale? What if we had a giant storm surge from a hurricane getting into Galveston Bay? We've got to build protective infrastructure like the Ike Dike to make sure that this doesn't happen the next time we get a hurricane.
Absolutely. And while I was looking at Instagram posts about it because I wanted to see footage of it, I fell into an actual fishing hole. So not a rabbit hole, but did you know there's this super cool community of fishing content around the city of Houston where anglers are just showing what bait they have and they're catching these huge fish? I was literally watching videos on Instagram for like 45 minutes of guys just fishing. It was so much fun. And I'll link some of the accounts there. It's wild.
It's awesome stuff. I'm old school. The Galveston Daily News has a daily fishing report that I get in my inbox every day. I don't fish, but I love to read it.
I love listening to Sports Radio 610 on the weekends. They have a fishing show. Captain Mickey does the reports like, all right, what's biting down in X, Y, and Z? And, you know, anglers just call in. It's so wild. It's so old school. I love it.
It's great stuff.
Hey, Evan, let's talk about your biggest story of the week. What do you got?
I think the biggest news this week is that the mayor's released his first budget. And what is so interesting about this for the city budget is that it is the dog that didn't bark. It's about $6.7 billion, about 7% over last year. But given that Mayor Whitmire spent his entire campaign attacking the Turner administration, saying they're kicking the can, claiming the city is bankrupt, now his own budget is basically Sylvester Turner's 7th budget. You know, there's no tax increases, there's no garbage fee, there's no major cuts one way or the other. It's nothing significant to the changes except covering the firefighter settlement, a couple $1 million extra there, and some cuts to the planning department and public works. But those are cuts from the general fund. They get most of their funding from water and sewage. So it's really the same old, same old. We're filling gaps with COVID dollars, and we're waiting until next year's budget to see if there's any major changes.
So all of the headlines about, hey, there's a potential of a garbage fee or our taxes might go up. None of that. They're like, we just don't want to deal with it right now. You know what? We're kind of new in this. We're just going to let this one go in. And there was about a deficit cut of $11.7 million, as you mentioned, from the general fund. So his administration is basically saying, we'll deal with it next year. That's what next year's for.
Yeah. And you know what? There's not really anything wrong with that. I mean, big change is hard. And there's a reason why Sylvester Turner didn't do any major changes to the budget when he had federal COVID dollars on hand. And there's a reason why he left a record amount of money in the city's savings account for the next mayor. Things are tough, but you had a mayor who really ran on the platform of making some big swings, and he's been in office for 5-6 months now. And at a certain point, you've got to start doing something besides picking fights with city council members over their road projects in their districts. Like, where's the big change?
All right, so what's next with the budget? Now we're going to go back and forth and hear opinions from city council. Is this it, or do you think there's going to be much change to it?
I mean, usually the mayor kind of sets the baseline, and then you'll have individual council members trying to get votes on amendments, but we'll probably have a vote sometime in June to see this go through. But there's still questions about what the firefighter pay deal actually looks like. The city is involved in litigation over our drainage fee, which may have the city owing $100 million more on infrastructure that we're legally compelled to spend. Not to mention just other things going on with the municipal workers union and other big fights. So we'll see what happens, but it really does seem like we're in a status quo for another year.
By the way, that firefighters deal in the first year, the city would spend a projected $30.6 million on bond payments for back pay and then $10 million on higher assignment and educational pay for firefighters. And in general, this whole plan is going to cost about $70 to $80 million in its first year. So that's what we're looking at right now in terms of that firefighters deal, the budget. I was ready. I was like, oh, here it is. Finally, there's going to be a garbage fee, but we're good next year. I like that. It's a lot like us. We'll just worry about it when it's time to worry about it. I don't need to fix it right now.
No, I mean, thank you, federal government, for all of this COVID money to help fill these gaps. Like, next year we might be in trouble, but things are okay right now.
Okay, Evan, I'm going to get to my story, and it has to deal with money as well. And this is a story that everyone's talking about. It started with the bombshell report from Spectrum News in Dallas, where Third Future Schools, that's the charter school network that HISD Superintendent Mike Miles ran. Spectrum News alleges that illegally used money from the Texas campuses of Third Future Schools were subsidizing its schools in Colorado. Now, Mike Miles has responded and said in an email, friends, partners, and board members, the story by Spectrum News in Dallas badly misunderstands or worse, intentionally misrepresents the financial practices of Third Future Schools. Mike Miles is saying, look, you guys can investigate this. We're ready to go. Mike Maratha said, yeah, we're going to look into this as well. And this is nuts because there are a lot of allegations in this report that Spectrum News reported on. I've linked that if you haven't seen it right now. But basically, that was it. Hey, you're using the money from the charter schools in Texas, which are publicly funded, and they are now using that money to subsidize schools in Colorado. That is huge.
Basically, his defense is what happened wasn't a misappropriation of funds and it wasn't a contracting violation. Like, all of this was fine because it was one big national organization. But it still seems weird, and it seems bizarre to have a guy in charge of HISD who is prioritizing charter schools and his own charter system over students in HISD. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. All this can be working together, but I don't see an attitude of trying to lift all boats here. I see someone who's really trying to pick fights with individual campuses, piss off the people in HISD. I don't see how the whole district is going to be better off once all of this is done.
Now, Mike Miles has not worked at the Third Future School since taking over for HISD for more than a year now. There's also a big part of that story where he did receive about $40,000 to consult when he was here at HISD when he first started. So there's that in that report as well. I mean, Evan, is this a thing that parents and teachers can rally around to have Mike Miles removed? Because they've been calling for Mike Miles to be removed for a while. The teachers union has been calling for it as well. Could this be the thing, or is this just another story?
I mean, it's interesting to see this report drop just as parents are out protesting the firing or forced resignation of principals at schools like Milan Performing Visual Arts Middle School and other campuses where the principals are considered to be doing a good job and the statistics being used to hire them are questionable. So I think it's just one thing after another. It all piles up.
All right, Evan, let's get to our most overlooked stories for the week. Why don't you kick it off?
I think the most overlooked story this week has to deal with the passing of Reverend Bill Lawson, who died this week at 95. He was the founding pastor of Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church and a key civil rights activist in Houston. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He bailed out TSU students who were arrested for engaging in sit-ins, and he was critical to desegregating the city, particularly our silent, behind-the-scenes method of desegregation that sought to avoid media attention and controversy. But what gets overlooked is that his civil rights work didn't stop in the 60s and 70s. Alongside Catholic Archbishop Fiorenza, Rabbi Karff, he led a faith-based campaign to create the Harris County Public Defender's Office. Sometimes you get this so-called Santa Clausification of civil rights that ignores the fact that the process is political. There's opposition. It's messy, and it's still happening right now. As the country becomes more secular, fewer people attend regular religious services, we're losing that faith-driven call for justice, but there are still fights for justice to be had right now. There's still policies that need to be implemented to ensure that everybody gets the rights guaranteed them under our state and federal constitutions, and a giant who had been fighting for them this whole time has passed.
Evan, one of the hardest things to understand about this, right, is the civil rights movement wasn't a couple of lifetimes ago. Somebody who was fighting in that time just passed away. I understand he was 95 years old, but that just kind of reminds you of just how close those years were. And that is so hard to digest sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. When I was a law student, I interned for the ACLU here in Texas, and I had the privilege of having Reverend Lawson come down and talk alongside some other civil rights attorneys about what it was like. And some of the work he did was just doing fundraising so they could pay to have Martin Luther King travel across the country and do advocacy work, or arrange for him to give speeches so they could sell tickets and raise money like that they needed to bail out students or pay for lawyers or just do the basic work of advocacy. You know, it really is the rubber hits the road of how this work gets done. And that stuff doesn't always come across in the history books or documentaries or movies.
By the way, his daughter, Melanie Lawson, who you've seen for years on ABC 13, has always done such a good job of representing her father's story, telling it, interviewing him when she could. And it was so cool to see. So we're thinking about the whole Lawson family today.
They're in our thoughts and in our prayers.
Houston's original neighborhood downtown is for everyone, and it's poppin'. It's our open-hearted home for our biggest celebrations and our treasured hidden gems. From the world-class theater district to incredible green spaces like Discovery Green, downtown is the place to be. In fact, more people visited downtown Houston last year than the entire population of Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio combined. There's no better time to live downtown than now. From starter apartments to luxury lofts, everyone can take advantage of the arts, business, culture, entertainment, food, and recreation. Now, you might think of downtown as only the heartbeat of Houston's regional economy, which it is, but there's so much more to it, including free events throughout the week with Downtown Houston Plus. From the Market Square Park Farmers Market every Saturday to Yoga Flow every Wednesday, you can find something to do and eat and watch in downtown Houston. Learn more at downtownhouston.org. Downtown Houston. Get energized and revived.
If you're unaware, T-Mobile calls themselves the Un-carrier, which is fitting, considering they've just unraveled their price lock guarantee for new customers. If you ask me, that's pretty uncool. If you're uncomfortable with a company that says one thing but does another, then stick with Xfinity, whose whole home Wi-Fi, wired internet, service, speed, and reliability are unparalleled. Avoid the Un-carrier. Stick with Xfinity. Effective for new customers after 1/17/24. T-Mobile's price lock will only reimburse your last bill if you terminate service due to a price increase.
Evan, my most overlooked story, we have an update on the independent panel that was reviewing the ongoing Houston Police Department scandal, and this comes from the Houston Chronicle. So now we know how all these suspended cases got initially identified. Who did it? It was Martha Montalvo, who served as the department's acting chief for a few months in 2016. Martha approved the implementation of the code throughout the department and added that the Special Victims Division began using it immediately. In the first 6 months of 2016, the report says the division suspended 550 cases involving sex offenses due to a lack of personnel. It also provided revised numbers on how many total incident reports were suspended using the internal code, going from 264,000 to 268,920, with around 9,000 of them from the Special Victims Division or sexual assault incident reports. So a little bit worse than what we initially thought. And now we're just starting to understand how this all got put into place, why this was put into place, who was responsible for it. And we're going to learn a little bit more about how it was implemented for so many years before people caught on and said, whoa, we got to stop this ASAP.
It's just incredible how this continued for so long before anyone noticed it. But also, I'm curious, are we seeing stuff like this happen in other police departments? Like, clearly, Houston is not alone in having a law enforcement agency that says they don't have the capacity that they need to cover the work in front of them. How are other agencies dealing with this? Do they have their own methods of trying to push stuff off to the side to dismiss cases where they feel like they don't have the capacity to handle it? Like, what is happening here that made Houston unique in contrast to other major cities?
Okay, so Evan, the code was born out of discussions that started in 2014 about cases that were not being investigated because of a lack of personnel. And then it started being used more throughout the years because of inconsistent division policy, bad data reporting, and no oversight from above on what was happening on a division level. That final sentence is huge right there. There's no oversight from above on what was happening on a divisional level. And that could be one of the big reasons why it became so rampant.
That really could be it. And we'll see as the investigation continues, as we learn more about what happened. But I just hope that we have a police department that recognizes that something went wrong here, that we rely on them to solve crimes, to stop crimes. And if they're not able to do that basics of the job, we need to see accountability.
All right, Evan, let's get to our moment of joy. What do you got for me? What made you happy this week?
What made me happy this week was watching public session down at City Hall and seeing so many people turn out to support the Shepherd Durham and Montrose projects for road safety and flood prevention. As Council Member Abby Kamen, who represents those neighborhoods, has pointed out, at this point, 120 community members have turned out in support. She said her office has received 195 emails in support of the Shepherd Durham project and just 2 opposed. This week, you had folks turning out from Shady Acres Parents Group, the president of the Greater Heights Super Neighborhood, a speaker from the Heights Association, someone for the White Oak Bayou Association, the president of the Richwood Place Association, Friends of Woodland Park, and I could go on. These are popular projects. They have broad support, and I'm glad to see the folks are speaking out. You know, sometimes squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that silent majority of folks who like to see safer roads and better flood infrastructure have to go about their days. One woman had to turn out carrying her baby with her as she spoke. It's hard for people to turn out on a Tuesday afternoon, but your ability to turn out like that shows you care.
Love hearing that. Love seeing people care that much to turn out on a Tuesday. That is awesome.
And I just hope that the mayor pays attention. I hope city council pays attention.
Evan, was there anything else that made you happy this week you want to talk about?
Now, you know, there's something else that happened at City Council this week was kind of neat. City Council tagged an effort to sell a stretch of White Oak hike and bike trail to TxDOT for freeway construction. This has been something that activists have been keeping an eye on for a while, but it actually happening had snuck up on them, got put on the agenda for this week. And a real concern is that the city's selling it off for cheap. I mean, they're selling it off for just a couple $100,000. There are folks who think that, citizens could just pool their cash together and buy it from the city, outbid TxDOT on this. But there's a lot of controversy around the ways that we are seeing critical parts of our hike and bike network being sacrificed for freeway expansion, even if we are going to see this I-45 expansion and rebuild go through, which seems likely. There are ways that you can do it without having to give up on these critical connections that allow people to bike all across our city. And even if we have to give up this part right here, what is the city going to do to build other connections in the meantime? That's an important question. And so I'm glad to see City Council getting on top of this and not letting it go so quickly.
Okay, my moment of joy. Now, this isn't a happy thing for me because this person's retiring. And the reason it's not happy is because he's been there literally every year that I've been here in the city of Houston since we immigrated here. But Frank Billingsley is retiring. The iconic meteorologist on KPRC Channel 2 is calling it a career in June. And we've seen him for the last 30 years. And as I mentioned, every single year that I've been here, I remember watching Frank Billingsley. He is saying, I'm done. You know what? I'm tired of wearing suits every single day. I'm tired of reporting on these super heavy stories with weather, with flooding. And I just want to enjoy my life a little bit. You know what? It's been a long time. But shout out to Frank Billingsley calling it a career after 30 years at Channel 2.
No, that's incredible. But I've got to say, I don't blame him for getting out before another hurricane season. At a certain point, you just got to relax to the extent that you can and just worry about your own home rather than looking over everyone else's.
I wonder if KPRC is like, hey, come on, we're about to enter the heaviest part of the year. This is what you live for. It's hurricane season. Come on, why are you leaving now? Leave in September or maybe October after we're done with this all. But you know what? That's cool that he did so much. He's covered so many huge weather events, has always been a staple in our community, is always down in Galveston. He's unofficially called the King of Galveston. We see him all the time. So shout out to him, man. What a career.
Congratulations.
Evan, it's going to be a good weekend. Enjoy it. Spend a lot of time outside before it gets really, really hot. There were some days that were really hot this week, but you know what? Hey, that's Houston. Everyone get used to it. It's going to be a good weekend. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'll see y'all next time. Hop in the pool if you get a chance.
That was Evan Mintz. You can find all the stories in our show notes. That will do it for this week here on CityCast Houston. Our producers are Carleon Jones and Joyce Tang. Our newsletter editor is Brooke Lewis, and the host is me, Raheel Ramzanali. Our music is by the band All the Kimonos. We'll be back on Monday with a look at why local janitors could go on strike. Hold on. Joyce, Carly, is my mic coming in super hot or is it fine?